Psychological warfare doesn't feel like war. There are no uniforms, no enemies named out loud, no moments where you're told you've been targeted. Most of the time, you don't even feel pressured. That's the point. The most effective influence does not announce itself as influence. It presents itself as information, as entertainment, as concern, as consensus. You don't feel attacked. You feel informed. And by the time something has shifted, you are already standing somewhere new, with beliefs you don't remember choosing. This is psychological warfare, and it is subtle. Traditional warfare relies on force, borders, weapons, casualties. Psychological warfare relies on something cheaper: perception. It does not destroy infrastructure, it reshapes meaning. It does not occupy territory, it occupies interpretation. Nothing needs to be taken from you directly. You only need to be guided towards certain conclusions often enough that they begin to feel like your own. The goal is not obedience. Obedience creates resistance. The goal is alignment. Stories are not neutral. They never have been. Narratives don't just explain the world. They define what is reasonable to think inside it. Every dominant narrative answers three questions: what matters, who matters, and what is not worth questioning. Once those boundaries are set, most people never test them. They don't feel restricted. They feel oriented. Psychological warfare doesn't argue every point. It decides which points are visible at all. You don't need to be convinced to be influenced. You only need exposure. Again and again and again. Repetition is not about logic. It's about familiarity. And what feels familiar feels safe. What feels safe feels true. This is why the most effective messages are mundane. Casual phrasing, background commentary, offhand remarks. When an idea is everywhere, no one feels responsible for introducing it. And when no one introduces it, no one questions where it comes from. Psychological warfare does not target intelligence. It targets emotion. Specifically, the emotions that shape behavior quietly. Fear of exclusion, fear of being wrong, fear of standing apart. Most people do not fear punishment. They fear isolation. So influence systems associate ideas with emotional signals: approval, ridicule, moral framing. Over time, people avoid these, not because they're false, but because they feel uncomfortable. And discomfort becomes a stop sign. Most people believe they think freely because no one tells them what to think. But freedom of thought is not determined by the absence of orders. It's determined by range of ideas you feel allowed to consider. Psychological warfare narrows that range quietly. Some ideas feel normal, others feel dangerous, others feel settled. Once an idea is labeled, most people never explore it directly. They accept the framing. One of the most overlooked weapons is speed. Constant updates, breaking information, endless reaction cycles. When attention is rushed, reflection disappears. There is no time to sit with uncertainty, no time to trace origins, no time to pause. In fast environments, the first interpretation often wins, not because it's accurate, but because it arrives before skepticism. Psychological warfare thrives where silence feels irresponsible. The most effective influence does not feel hostile. It feels protective, concerned, responsible, well-intentioned. Who would resist guidance meant to keep them safe? But once concern becomes justification, limits expand quietly. And when limits are framed as care, people enforce them on themselves. No coercion required. Eventually, the system no longer needs to speak. People begin to anticipate the correct response. They self-edit, self-censor, self-correct. Not because they're afraid, but because deviation feels unnatural. At this point, psychological warfare becomes invisible. Because the target believes they are acting independently. Psychological warfare succeeds because it does not feel like loss. It feels like normal life. It doesn't remove freedom, it rearranges incentives. It doesn't eliminate choice, it makes some choices heavier than others. Most people don't feel controlled. They feel comfortable. And comfort rarely triggers suspicion. There is no enemy to fight here, no villain to overthrow. Psychological warfare cannot be defeated with outrage. Outrage feeds it. It cannot be defeated with noise. Noise sustains it. The only countermeasure is attention. Slow, deliberate, unrewarded attention. Awareness does not make you immune, but it restores choice. Psychological warfare does not end. It adapts. But once you see it, you stop confusing influence with inevitability. You begin to notice what pressures you emotionally, what rushes you cognitively, what discourages you from pausing. And in that pause, something shifts. You don't rebel. You don't disengage. You simply stop moving automatically. That is not resistance. That is sovereignty.